From under the Golden Dome in Charleston, this is the West Virginia Capitol Report.
Hello everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of the Capitol Report. I'm Bill Laird along with co-host Dave Perry, and we have a great show lined out for you today. We are joined here in our studios by a good friend, a newly elected member of the West Virginia House of Delegates from the 42nd Delegate District, Cindy Lavender Bowe. And Cindy, welcome to the Capitol Report show.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Absolutely. And again, I say newly elected. You were successful in the 2018 primary and general elections in the 42nd Delegate District. Comparatively new to the process, and always, I think, a good question to ask. Of course, we have a citizen legislature where folks are elected to serve, and there's turnover, but you go through the door of the state capitol for the first time. It's an awesome responsibility and honor to serve. If you could, for our viewers, just kind of give us a little sense of your impression as a newly elected member, and what do you think of the process so far?
Well, as you say, it's definitely an honor to serve, and when you walk into that Capitol and the evening that I was sworn in, it was pretty overwhelming. I felt a lot of pride to be there. It was my first election. I've never run for anything, but I've always been community oriented and active, and I've always been the first person to say, don't complain, do something. That's kind of how I ended up there. And in this first election, I was very fortunate to be selected by the people to represent the 42nd District. And so it's just an honor to be down there and to work for my constituents. And so far, it's been a really positive experience. You know, I'd say 98% of what we do in the House, we agree on. And we put forth legislation that I think has a positive impact for our constituents. We work across the aisle, we get along. That's, you know, all positive. But, you know, sometimes there are things that we don't agree on, and those things can be quite controversial and pretty stressful. You know, when we were looking at the foster care system this past session and the campus carry, and of course Senate Bill 451, those things were all really challenging and really difficult, but I learned a lot about the experience, and it really, I'd say, serving just this first session was very clarifying for me. It becomes very clear as to why I'm there and what I'd like to do.
You know, and again, been some concerns, perhaps that, you know, the civility of the process, the ability to interact and, you know, certainly disagree. Sort of the legislative process, I think, was sort of designed to create, you know, debate, competing ideas. But at the end of the day, you know, we should have common interests and concerns, and that's certainly advancing the interests of the citizens of the state of West Virginia. But you know, from your perspective, have you found it to be a fairly civil process where folks, you know, try to work together?
Yeah, it has been a pretty civil process. Being on the outside, when I was, you know, before I was running and looking at things, I would have thought it would have been pretty contentious. But when I got there, I was really surprised at how welcoming everyone has been and how helpful on both sides of the aisle. And I've made great friends, both Democrats and Republicans and independents. And most people are there in the House, most delegates are there for the same reason, and that's because they want to make West Virginia the best that it can be. Absolutely. And that certainly comes across. There are challenges, there are disagreements, but I think for the most part, the delegates are very respectful.
That's good.
Delegate, you talked about the first term and your first election, and of course there was some bills last session that dealt with campaign finance. Mm-hmm. How do you think this will affect the future face of elections, people's abilities to run or not run, or what would be your opinion on that?
Well, I was really surprised about how much money it takes to run, how much money you have to raise, and that's really hard to do for most people. And I'll tell you, when I was campaigning and then while serving and speaking to constituents, I never heard anybody say, I wish we could give you more money for your election, for your campaign. So it was really odd to me that that was even a piece of legislation that was taken up, because I don't understand how it makes things better for the average West Virginian, especially when you think about, we need more regular people, we need more regular citizens in the legislature. And if you've just made it easier for wealthy folks, and it's a lot easier for some people to ask for a $2,800 contribution than it is for some people to ask for $100. So I'm fearful that it's going to further tilt that elections toward the haves, and and keep more regular folks out of it.
Yep. That's a real concern. But Cindy, again, your first regular session, and boy, what a place to start.
I've been promised it's not always
well,
like that.
and again, very dominant during the regular session. Obviously, was education transformation, I think, is the word David Perry prefers. But nonetheless, that legislative time is a pretty valuable commodity when you think about the time that you spend. If you're spinning your wheels, that means you don't really have the time to focus on other pressing issues affecting West Virginia. But obviously the stakeholders in that legislation were very passionate. Teachers front and center, really sparked almost a national movement in terms of the importance of properly paying and compensating professional educators. But you're a member of the Education Committee as a first-term delegate, and again, you had a front row seat in that public policy debate. If you would just talk in general terms about the contentious nature of that issue in the regular session, and of course upcoming special session. By the time this airs, perhaps that will be resolved, but that's important to the future of West Virginia.
Yeah, for sure. I was really proud to be a part of the House Education Committee. I thought that our committee did great work. We worked well together. We debated, we discussed, we researched, we called witness after witness. We had parents there, we had teachers. We tried to get as many stakeholders as we could there, and I think that we passed a pretty good version of what was sent over to us by the Senate of 451. We made some tweaks to it, and there were valuable, helpful, transformational pieces in that bill. But in the end, it was not successful because nobody wanted that big, ominous omnibus bill. And to be called back into the special session, it's really been disheartening to see the Senate seem to be repeating the same thing over, bringing another large, all-encompassing education bill. And I'm very hopeful that with the special session coming up now in the House, that we're going to look at this piece by piece. And we did, even back in the regular session. We had lots of bills that were individual pieces of legislation targeting those things that we thought our stakeholders are most concerned with, and that is dealing with childhood trauma and how that impacts the classroom. There's wraparound services that teachers and folks in the school system kept asking us about. Certainly, teacher pay and personnel pay, I don't think should be tied within all of this. I think we need to look at everything individually. Very hopeful that we can do that. I think that's the best way to tackle anything legislatively, rather than trying to lump it all together and say that this is what you get.
Right. I understand as we look at a special session that it may be abbreviated session. Some of that may be as a result talking about each individual bill standing on their own, but I understand there may be a move afloat perhaps to reject the omnibus bill initially.
Yeah.
And then to take up different parts or different bills per se relevant to session. Is that pretty fair to assess?
I would say that's a fair assessment, and I would say I'm hopeful that that's what happens. I'd like to put that omnibus bill away and deal with the pieces as individual bills and let everything be an up or down on its own merit and not this tied to this, and if you want this, then you got to give us this. I think that's a fair thing to do. I think that's what truly puts our children and our education system first, if we look at it like that. I'm also a little bit concerned, obviously not the pay raise aspect. That's something that we can do and just make happen. We've actually even got space for it in the budget already. But I really worry about transformation or reform, however you look at it, if we rush too quickly into something. I think that we do know that our educational needs have changed so much over the last decade with the impact of the drug crisis in the state. And I just want to make sure that we are being mindful and making well thought out decisions.
Of course, it would appear that the Speaker of the House or the Republican caucus, along with the Democrats, may have come up with a plan to look at it individually. And that plan involves 4 committees.
Yep.
And as a freshman delegate, I'll use the word freshman, but I'm sure you're experienced by now.
The 40-something freshman is what I call
40-something
myself.
freshman, okay. That you will be the minor chair on Committee C.
Yeah, Committee C.
Committee C will be looking at what types of things, or do you know at this point?
I have not seen what's going to be coming through that committee, but it is a committee that's it's got a lot of leadership on the Republican side on that committee. So I would say there's going to be some pretty important pieces of legislation coming through that committee. Just because the folks that I see in the makeup of it, I think they're going to be bringing some things through that committee that they're very passionate about. And I'm thrilled to be on that committee to be able to take on those issues and see if we can help to get the ones out with the most merit for our kids.
Cindy, again, going back just briefly to the omnibus, all-inclusive, all-or-nothing type legislation versus more of an incremental or smaller bites of the same issue. And again, you have a background in education. You were a teacher yourself, and certainly know the importance of good, qualified, capable classroom teachers. To me, that is education, is classroom teachers. But the ability to extract the good and leave the less good or even the bad alone, I guess, is the magic in trying to take a more measured approach to this. But you mentioned such things as wraparound services. I think there is something in here intended to improve the counseling component. There's a lot of issues that children face today that folks of my generation did not have to contend with. The substance abuse, some of the breakdown in the nuclear family, just a whole host of issues that kids have to deal with that could ultimately affect the learning process. And I think that's some of the good stuff embedded in that bill.
Yeah. We used to, a generation ago or so, or longer, we recognized that, hey, if kids are hungry, they're not going to learn. So we started working on those issues. And now we're looking at if kids have experienced trauma, and there are estimates that it's as high as 40% of the children in our school system in our state have been exposed to at least one traumatic event, be that divorce or death or drug abuse or a parent in prison, mental health issues in the family. So we've got to start to look at that and to support the whole child in that way. Just like we figured out, hey, we need to feed them so that we can learn. We've got to learn to support and feed them in other ways and not just expect our teachers to be the first responders and to figure it out on their own. They're facing challenges, these kids, that certainly I know my generation didn't and yours didn't either, and it's a completely different challenge in the classroom. And we've got to really start to look at that.
No doubt about it. Well, again, we're going to have to take a break. Some other issues we want to talk to you about. But again, to our viewers, the future of education transformation, a very important discussion affecting the future of the state of West Virginia. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and Dave and I'll be back with our guest in a moment. So stay with us, everybody.
Stay tuned. The West Virginia Capitol Report will be right back. The West Virginia Capitol Report is brought to you by the AFL-CIO of West Virginia, Cucumber and Company, online at cucumberandcompany.com, and Mark Hunt and Associates, toll free at 800-554-1280. From under the Golden Dome in Charleston, this is the West Virginia Capitol Report.
Welcome back to the Capitol Report as we continue our discussion with Cindy Lavender Bowe, delegate from the 42nd Delegate District. And David, I believe you have a question, sir.
Delegate, you were present in a lot of the forums and a lot of public meetings. When you go into this special session or coming out of this special session, what do you feel are the negatives of the pieces of legislation, and what do you feel are the positives that are contained in this omnibus bill that you hope to take up as standalone bills?
Right. And, I was really pleased that we were able to hear from so many of the stakeholders prior to the special session, and I think that we learned a lot about what we need to take up. I am all about smaller classrooms. My son is in a public school in Greenbrier County, but he went to a private school in his early years because his pediatrician recommended he be in a small classroom, and we know how beneficial that is for kids. I would like to see support for these wraparound services. As opposed to charter schools, I'd like to see a return to funding of our innovation grants and allowing the schools on a local level to figure out how it is that they can work outside the box to achieve the needs what are best for the children in each community. Because I tell you, what we need in Greenbrier County is going to be vastly different from what they need for the students in Berkeley County. There will be some things that are the same, but what we maybe need for a workforce, for example, the needs are going to be different. So I think that we need to think about local control in that way and putting, the program is already there, just putting some funding back in that. Definitely support for the pay raises for our school personnel. And I really, I would love to see an expansion of the Mountaineer Challenge Academy. I've actually been working with some delegates who are going to introduce as a standalone piece. We're going to ask for a Mountaineer Challenge Academy here in Fayette County. We think we need that here in the southern part of the state. We're also looking at introducing bills that are going to increase the number of counselors for students. I'd like to see an increase in the number of school nurses. And separate from the whole trauma thing we've talked about, we have a skyrocketing number of children who are diabetic.
Yes.
And so these are the things that I would like to see. I didn't hear from constituents saying we need charter schools, not in Greenbrier County. I didn't hear folks really clamoring for a lot of things that are in this second omnibus bill.
Cindy, again, I've heard some really good reports about the first-term delegates currently elected in the 2018 election cycle, and one of the things I hear is we have some really bright, forward-thinking women in the minority caucus, and I believe you may have had something to do with the organization of a women's caucus within the minority party of the legislature. If you could just tell us a little bit about sort of the collegial type of interaction you've been able to establish, and there are important women's issues in the state of West Virginia.
Yeah, we pretty quickly got together and formed the first ever West Virginia House Democratic Women's Caucus. I'm the chairperson of that. And we meet together weekly, and we talk about legislation that has been introduced or legislation that we can introduce that is about empowering and supporting women and children. That's the purpose of what we do. We were able to get a budget amendment to increase funding for the rape crisis centers around the state. That was a successful thing that we did. we introduced a lot of legislation that didn't make it very far, but we're going to be bringing these things back up, like the Katherine Johnson Fair Pay Act, named after the scientist featured in Hidden Figures, the movie. She was from White Sulphur, and so we introduced that. We worked on another piece that had to do with the tax on diapers and feminine hygiene products, because these are things that people have to have, and they are taxed. So it seems like an unfair tax. So we're trying to remove that tax. So those are just some of the things that we've been thinking about for women and children. How can we support them economically and just as a whole? So it's been great to have these women that we can sit down and we can talk about our perspectives, and then we can go into our minority caucus meetings and say, okay, this is our perspective on this issue, or have we thought about this? And so we're just trying, it makes it easier to have a voice when you have 8 people banded together saying, we want to do this. So that's been phenomenal. Apart from the women, we have a very strong group of just freshman delegates, especially on the Democratic Caucus, and we're in touch daily. And whether it's just to support each other and check in how we're doing, because it's a stressful learning process. But we also have great ideas that come out of that group, and we work really well together, and we want to move the minority caucus forward. And we'd like to grow our numbers so that maybe in a couple of years we can be the majority caucus. So.
Absolutely. Well, and again, there are always, it's a smorgasbord of issues, but there's a category I refer to as kitchen table issues. You know, you can kind of get in a little bit of bubble in Charleston, but there are challenges that families face, particularly in southern West Virginia, of the financial stressors that come along with low workforce participation rates, those types of things. And again, I think that's something that I have had a sense with the newly elected members of that body, is they bring a little bit more of those kitchen table issues to the process, as opposed to the ones that have been debated ad nauseum for 25 years. That seems that way to me.
I think among the freshmen we have a pretty varied, we have varied backgrounds. We have a teacher, we have a banker, we have somebody who is a stay-at-home mom, we have a doctor. So we have these very different perspectives, and it is great that we can come together and we can talk about the things that we see in our communities, or even in our own homes, and it leads to ideas for legislation.
Yeah. And again, your committee assignments, you're on the Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee. And again, you like to be able to kind of mirror your district, and one of the great strengths of Greenbrier County is the agricultural base, and that's part of the efforts to diversify our economy, and certainly agricultural issues important to your constituents.
Yeah, we were really thrilled to be able to pass the Right to Farm Act out of the regular session. That was very important to the farmers in my district, and they contacted me early on about that. They've been educating me because I don't have an agricultural background, so they've been teaching me from the get-go, what they would like to see happen. We also have a growing hemp production in Greenbrier County, and that's a really exciting industry. The farmers in Greenbrier County were just right there, ready to go. They are always cutting edge agriculturally, and it's pretty exciting.
Absolutely.
On the lighter side, Cindy, I noticed we saw a lot of red during the regular session, and a lot of red during the special session. But I noticed you've got red tennis shoes on today. What's that signify?
These are my Red for Ed shoes, and just a reminder to me and to my fellow delegates that education was the main reason that I ran for office. I was a teacher for 10 years. I have a kid, a ninth grader in the public school system in West Virginia. My husband and I were educated in the public school system in West Virginia, and that's always foremost in my role and my duties as a delegate. And so this is a reminder, and I've actually recruited several delegates, and you'll have to check out our footwear because we're planning on wearing our red shoes during the special session.
That's great. Well, Cindy, unfortunately, our time has expired, and but Dave and I really want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today on the Capitol Report, and certainly want to wish you every continued good success. You're off to a great start, and again, congratulations in representing the 42nd Delegate District in the West Virginia House of Delegates.
Thank you. It's my honor. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Okay. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and Dave and I'll be right back to close things out. So stay with us, everybody.
The West Virginia Capitol Report is brought to you by the AFL-CIO of West Virginia, Cucumber and Company, online at cucumberandcompany.com, and Mark Hunt and Associates, toll free at 800-554-1280.
Welcome back to the Capitol Report Show as we close out today's program. And David, Cindy Lavender Bowe, what a bright lady, newly elected, first-term member of the House of Delegates from the 42nd Delegate District, but very clear that she has a good handle on some important issues and brings a lot to the process.
It's obvious that she's made her presence known, Bill, or she wouldn't be excelling in the number of committees she belongs to, and the vice chair, minority chair of the special committee, and on one of 4 major committees, education.
Well, that's going to do it for today's show. Again, on behalf of my co-host Dave Perry, I'm Bill Laird. Thank you all for tuning us in each week on the Capitol Report. Have a good week, and goodbye, everybody.